Next, we're going to hear from Work Group 4, which is the group that organizes presentations for our monthly consortium meetings. And Jill Tullman, co-leader of this group, will now take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. First, I want to acknowledge that these opening remarks were developed by Sarah with input from our excellent work group members. Thank you to everyone. And extra thanks to Endever, my awesome co-leader, who I couldn't have helped facilitate this work group without you, Endever. I know this is your last day with us, and I hope you know how much you are loved and how much you will be missed by the consortium. So thank you. Mwah. Okay. Work Group 4 was tasked with planning presentations for our monthly consortium meetings and identifying barriers and opportunities to AAC peer support. Today's presentation will be our last, and to close out our time together and contribute to the final report, we will focus our discussion on ways to get past some of the barriers we have identified as a consortium. So let's review where we started that has brought us to where we are today. Our first presentation focused on an AAC camp for kids. We soon learned from this consortium that this is an important way people access peer support, but it is not and should not be the only form of peer support. There has to be a diverse array of options to meet people's needs and interests. This led us to a presentation by Bridging Communities through Alternative Communication, or Big Tech, led by our very own Patrick Reagan and his friends, which had started out as a formal AAC group, but evolved into organic peer support that is led and facilitated by peers for peers. The information Big Tech shared helped Work Group 4 change our direction to focus on presenting about organic peer support. The past few months, we continued to explore this topic with input from all of you. We formed a definition of organic peer support and recently presented some of the barriers we have found to this form of peer support. An amazing unforeseen outcome of this AAC Peer Support Consortium is that we have heard from members time and time again that we are enacting peer support with one another as part of this project. We think everyone should have access to this type of support when they need it and when they want it. Today, we will focus on identifying potential ways to overcome barriers to organic peer support, using this consortium as a case study, describing ways this group has gotten past barriers, imagining ways we could do things better, and addressing barriers we have not resolved. Barriers are unavoidable, but they are not impossible to overcome. When you hit a barrier, you have an opportunity to re-envision it. We recognize these are not easy problems to solve and do not claim to have all of the solutions. And there are some solutions that won't meet every need at once. So we will need to continue to adapt and learn together, which we've been successfully doing as a consortium. Today, we look forward to more of your expert input in our group discussion after we hear from our brilliant and gifted panelists. As you listen to the panel, please consider this question. How has this consortium overcome some of the barriers to AAC peer support, and what would more solutions look like? Now we're going to turn it over to our fantastic panel, which will be moderated by our awesome Kirk Benke.
Thank you, Jill. I had the honor to moderate our overcoming our our barriers. And the first one up is Kevin Williams, who is going to be speaking about overcoming our attitudinal barriers.
You hear me? Hello, I'm Kevin Williams. I'm here to speak about attitudinal barriers and how the consortium has really evolved over the course of our time together to minimize these barriers. At the start of the consortium, fear was a barrier for many of us. I thought everyone was cautious to speak and give input, especially those who use AAC. I will make a generalization about people who use AAC, myself included. We're typically afraid to give our opinions during a live session because often we have an attitude of feeling that we are interrupting the flow of meetings, especially when we have to compose a message of our thoughts in front of those we don't know. This fear happens to just about everyone, but for people who use AAC, it is more acceptable to not be forced to speak in the conversation. Also, those speakies, talkies, mouth speakers, or whatever term we want to use for non-AAC users, naturally fill in the quiet moments to give us an escape. So people who use AAC have a tendency to sit and take everything in, ponder for a bit, and give a reaction at a later time, usually in the form of an email or a prepared message at the next meeting. This practice doesn't lead to productive and deep conversation that we needed to have in order to develop key areas for peer support. We would be just reciting well-crafted soliloquies to each other and not solving problems with each other. So, how did we as a group change people's attitude to a more relaxed and positive one to where we can have great conversations and don't want them to end? One major change in attitude that we did as a group is become and show our ability to be comfortable with silence. Especially when a person who uses AAC is trying to compose a message or even looks like they are composing something. When we recognize that somebody has something to say, we are comfortable in pausing the conversation, remembering the context when somebody does complete and speak their message, includes the message into the conversation, and then continuing the conversation afterwards. So being comfortable in silence is not about being quiet, it is about incorporating the message after the silence. Because of this group consistently is comfortable. The attitude of a person who uses AAC changes and becomes more comfortable in sharing some deeper thoughts, and the barrier of fear dissipates. To conclude, attitudinal barriers to peer supports are just how people feel when coming into contact with the service or group. The negative feeling of fear is just one attitude barrier.
You want another one?
Simply, positivity from all stakeholders is the antidote to most attitudinal barriers. I will end on that positive note. Thank you, everyone.
Evan, I believe that regarding AAC users' initial reservations about sharing, Lateef said this is true. Previously, Lateef responded to Melanie and said, that is cool, the Zoom rooms will stay open. And Jill, Endeavor responded to your words about them with 3 hearts and 3 exclamation points.
You got your feedback. You take it from you, I think.
Thank you, Kevin. Our next is overcoming structural barriers. And our speaker is going to be, our panelist, excuse me, is going to be Michael Fondacaro.
This one?
You guys are making me emotional, which is extremely rare. Endeavor, it has been an honor to work with you. Anyway, on to my presentation. Hi, everybody. This is Michael Fondacaro again, talking about structural barriers again. However, today I will be talking about this consortium and how, collectively, we overcame some of the structural barriers that I discussed last time. I will start with the barrier of geographical location. From the very start of this project, we have been fully virtual, meeting inside of our own homes. Being fully virtual has almost eliminated the barrier of geographical location because nobody has to travel to attend any of our meetings. The reason I say almost eliminated is if somebody doesn't have good internet at their house, they have to move to a location that has decent internet to participate in our meetings. Overall, we have done a great job of eliminating the barrier of geographical location. Before I move on, I would like to briefly discuss the option of self-driving cars. If we all had access to self-driving cars, geographical location would be much less of an issue, and we could meet in person, which would eliminate all of the barriers of meeting virtually, which I will explain in a minute. Not everyone likes to meet virtually. Some people enjoy the environment of in-person interactions. Self-driving cars will make transportation for people with disabilities much easier, which in turn would make going to in-person events simpler. So, why am I talking about self-driving cars so much? Well, I got selected to be part of the steering committee for a self-driving car study for people with disabilities. I will be working with the University of Michigan and General Motors. So I am really excited to give my input to make self-driving cars as accessible as possible. Anyway, let's get back to the structural barriers. As I mentioned earlier, we have almost eliminated the barrier of geographical location by being completely virtual. Being virtual has been great, but it comes with its own set of issues, such as platform accessibility, having to be technology literate, and having to have internet access. I have to say, we have done an awesome job at making every single meeting as accessible to everyone as we possibly could. This includes reading chat messages, live closed captioning, having discussion guidelines, so AAC users have the priority to speak, which I truly appreciate, and we even have a variety of options for giving input. For example, People can email their feedback. People can put their feedback in a survey, or they can give their response asynchronously. I can honestly say that this consortium has been the most accessible meeting I have attended, and it is not even close. So, thank you, everybody. There is one more structural barrier I would like to discuss, and I have to give Endeavor credit for this one. Speaking a different language is a problem for some AAC users because their device cannot speak multiple languages. However, some devices can convert what you type into another language, which I think it is really cool. I would love to discuss the barrier of language further. To conclude, the consortium has knocked down a lot of structural barriers, and I am very appreciative of that. Thank you.
About the study you're participating in, Michael, Holly said, "Congratulations, Michael." And Tracy said, "Wow, so cool." Alyssa says, "Hi, please let me say effing and other mixed language utterances with my AAC." Actually, let me read that again. Hi, let me read exactly what Alyssa wrote. "Hi, please let me say fucking and other mixed language utterances with my AAC." And Amy Zarkowski also said, "Kevin Williams, such a thoughtful response. Thank you for putting in the effort to craft that meaningful summary." And I will just note, I will distinguish which Amy is which as I read the chat moving forward today. Patrick says, in response to Alyssa, "You and my friend Tyson. That is accessibility, I think." Ah, sorry for my error in reading Alyssa's message. Alyssa says, "LOL, you made the exact same error reading it that most English language systems make, skipping the Chinese part." Yeah, I didn't know how to read those symbols. Sorry again, Alyssa. And Stasha Stasha says, "That is amazing about cars."
I'm gonna chime in here and say thank you to Michael. And Michael, good luck with your research and being part of that advisory committee on self-driving cars. You should know traffic. You live in northern New Jersey and New York area, so as I do here, as your from your neighboring state in Philadelphia or neighboring city in Philadelphia. Anyway, thank you, Michael. And I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Lateef McLeod. And Lateef will be talking to us about overcoming the social barriers.
Lateef, is it okay if I read a question in the chat that was related to Michael's? Thank you. Rachel said, "Curious, does anyone know what AAC devices are programmed like in other countries with different languages? Or if this is a USA issue where devices are primarily geared toward default to English speakers?"
Pleasure working with you. Endeavor.
Alyssa responded to Rachel's question with a link and said, it is mostly about a documentary script, but it has a table in it about language options in AAC devices. Endeavor says, "Thank you, Lateef. Everyone is making me so happy sad."
I'm not sure, Rachel.
And Michael, Patrick said to you, Michael, we need planes too, winky face emoji. Emily said, go birds. And Jordyn said, go Browns, laughing emoji. Georgia says, my AAC device supports about 5 languages, but not at the same time.
I agree.
Alyssa says, Prolo 2 Go supports code mixing with any 2 of its supported languages, but not 3+. Lateef says, should I do my presentation now?
Yeah.
I am Lateef McLeod, and I use he/him pronouns. I am here today to talk about solutions to social barriers to AAC peer support. First, any solution to a social barrier must be initiated or heavily influenced by the perspectives of people who use AAC. We as people who use AAC know acutely the type of social barriers that we face. For example, it is the people who use AAC who are coming up with more of the AAC barriers and the solutions to these barriers in this consortium because we deal with these issues every day. This fact is especially true when it comes to the social oppression of ableism and speechism, since we experience it on an acute level in our daily lives. Able-bodied people who do not experience ableism and speechism as acutely as us must listen to us as we take the lead in offering solution to these problems. Specifically, when it comes to AAC peer supports, families, caregivers, and schools should listen to their young people who use AAC when they would like to have AAC peer support in their lives. All these groups should be educated on the importance of the disability community as to people with disabilities, and especially to people who use AAC. Once engaged in the disability community, parents, teachers, and caregivers will be more willing to support and facilitate their young people who use AAC pursuing AAC peer support. That is the main takeaway that I want to leave with is for AAC peer support to succeed, the community has to be involved. We see this community support in action by all our support in this consortium, which is why we were so successful in this project. That is the end of my presentation, but I would like to reiterate it was a pleasure working with you, Endever.
Thanks, Lateef. In the chat, Alyssa also put another link and said, and insert link, is my personal frustrations that I hope to publish after updating it. And Lisa said, devices are typically programmed in a single language determined at the time of acquisition. Some software, such as Grid 3, has options for using a second language. The issue is switching all the navigation and commands as well. This is a possibility with apps like Predictable. Patrick says, I was bilingual when I started using AAC and had to prioritize English when I started school because the device could not easily switch back and forth. Technology advances in language are great and more advances are needed. And Kevin responded to Jordyn and said, here we go, brownies, here we go, woot woot.
Thank you, Lateef, for summarizing our social barriers and how we can overcome them. You bring out some really valid points on both of your slides, so thank you for that. Our next panelist is Endeavor. They will be talking about overcoming organizational barriers. So Endeavor, take it away if there isn't any other chat.
Just a quick one. Lateef says Niners.
This is Endeavor talking. As we saw last month, organizational barriers can relate to funding, infrastructure, logistical support, and more. I talked about an imaginary AAC summer camp as a way of conceptualizing some of those barriers. But today, I'm going to touch on a few ways our consortium itself has overcome some organizational barriers to organic peer support. First, I'm extremely grateful that this project was funded. Getting people paid for their work is one important way of creating sustainability and supporting the equitable involvement of multiply marginalized participants. There was also a lot of built-in infrastructure support due to utilizing existing organizations, as opposed to building from the ground up. So thank you to ACL, EUCD, Communication First, and OHSU for setting us up to overcome those usual initial barriers. Perhaps most remarkably, rather than being solely organized by or directed by professionals or caregivers, our peer support consortium has had AC users in leadership positions from the very beginning. I have learned so much from individual leaders who use AAC as well as from seeing how shared power can work in action. And it seems to me that experimenting with accessibility reminders and meeting guidelines has also helped equalize the playing field so that user perspectives could continually be prioritized in all of our various meetings. Let's also take a moment to appreciate Sarah, Bree, and other core support team members. From my perspective as someone who was on the leadership team, having Sarah on the project specifically to deal with all the logistics and organizing tasks took a huge burden off me as an AC user. I was able to focus on contributing my lived experience rather than worrying about email lists and note-taking and everything else she has done for us. Thanks to everyone who has been providing this kind of support. To wrap up, I think our key strength in overcoming organizational barriers to peer support has been what we've done to prioritize AC user perspectives in each aspect of the project. Now that we have a model for that, I think the key solution going forward is to utilize that strength in a way that continues to secure funding and infrastructure support for ongoing peer support projects. Finally, thank you all so much for the amazing kudos.
In the chat, Jordyn says, when I was in undergrad, someone in my resident hall programmed some things in Spanish with the buttons in English. It was a great prank, but the system did not actually work great when I was in the classroom during my master's program and students were bilingual with Spanish/English. I just couldn't switch like that at all without major delays and frustrations. Patrick said, unfortunately, that was my experience. Kevin says, ditto what Endeavor said about Sarah and Bree with the new do. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Endeavor.
And thank you, Endeavor, for all of your hard work and commitment to this project. Okay, next we have Linda Akagi, and she is going to be talking about overcoming technology barriers. Linda, take it away.
Linda, I think you have to unmute yourself or ask someone to help you with the computer part to unmute.
Rachel said, I think Linda's camera/device just took a tumble. And while Linda's unmuting, Lateef said, yes, definitely thank you to Sarah and Bree. Alyssa also says, I use eSpeak and live typing as my current best option for Chinese/English.
I'm gonna suggest, if it's okay for time's sake, that we move on to Lisa, and then hopefully Linda will be able to rejoin and we can go backwards.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
So the next person for our panelist, or our last person, and then we'll come back to Linda, is Lisa Bardach, and she's going to be talking about tech supports for overcoming our technology barriers. Lisa, take it away.
So I'm sorry that we haven't had a chance to hear Linda's presentation yet, because I think she has some really valuable things to say about overcoming technology barriers. As a practitioner, I tend to be focused on how do we use technology to help people overcome all of the other barriers. So my first point is that we need to look at person-first solutions. You identify the problem or the need, and then you explore solutions. It's feature matching, essentially, where you find out what's most important and manage that, as opposed to say, here are some things that this box has, let's see what we can do with it. Another way to look at person-first solutions is to try to have people create lists of things by starting out with phrases like, I wish I could. For example, switch between apps and functions quickly and seamlessly. From the chat, I wish I could switch between 2 different languages quickly and seamlessly and have my device say them out loud correctly. Another thought is to say, it is hard for me to. For example, hit small buttons with eye gaze, place a cursor in a particular place for a particular function. Or another thing, I hate when I'm trying to make a phone call and I end up in voice tree hell. Those are ways to identify how we can make platforms better. An example of a solution of this in practice is with a person I was supporting recently with ALS, who uses eye tracking on an iOS device. And we were talking about assistive touch and how to program that. And his question was, what are the best functions to put on assistive touch? And there's not really an answer to that question, because the best functions depend on what your needs are and what you might need to be able to do quickly and how quickly. So you could put something on assistive touch, which would take you 3 hits to get to, or you could put it in a hot corner, which would take 1 hit to get to. And so there's no one size meets all. And that gets to my next point, which is that solutions are a toolkit. And we should have a variety of technology solutions to overcome barriers and implement the ones that are germane to the particular problem or problems we might be addressing. So an example of a barrier that was discussed was the need for caregiver help, and the fact that often caregivers switch quickly, or they're not comfortable with technology, or they're not going to do it right. One potential solution to that would be to consider making short how-to videos and setting them up with QR codes that can be put around a person's environment. And then when a support person needs to know exactly how to do something, there's a video available immediately that will show them, walk them through the steps, and tell them how to do something to be able to provide better support. Some examples of solutions, technology solutions that have happened during the consortium. Clearly, one of the significant ones is being able to access the chat. And one solution, of course, that's been very successful in this consortium meeting, all of our meetings, are that somebody reads the chat aloud. But as has been pointed out, there isn't always someone who can read the chat aloud. So other potential solutions might be using apps like Join In, which have a feature in them that will read the chat aloud, using keyboard shortcuts to get to something, having an additional monitor, lobbying Zoom to put a feature within its tools that would read chats aloud. There are a lot of potentials, and we'd use which one is necessary or useful. Another example is if a person finds speaking with their voice to be significantly more efficient than using an SGD, then they can attend a meeting with a person who revoices for them, a person who understands their speech perhaps better than other people might, so that they can communicate in the most efficient way according to their own choice. Speech might be difficult to understand. This is irrespective of whether you're an AAC user or a talkie, and closed captions can be a way to try to help mitigate that. Another example, speech to speech also. Another example is that the consortium chose to use Zoom due to some accessibility features. And my understanding is that this was due to a real exploration of what features were available in different systems. And then finally, if we can find a way to find someone who has the tech skills to help us out, that's a fantastic thing. Things that you might consider looking at when you're looking for someone who has the tech skills is, what is your particular AAC device or AAC system or technology device or system? Are you using a computer? And if so, what is the operating system? Are you looking at Windows, Android, iOS, iPadOS, Linux, something else? Thinking about the difference between accessibility versus universal design, because universal is not necessarily accessible for everybody. And then the last thing that we've talked about is funding. There may be people out there who are able to help, but what is the way that they can get paid if that's a necessity? If they volunteer, fantastic, but if there needs to be a payment, how does that happen? So these are just some thoughts on using technology to overcome barriers, and I think there are a lot of really great solutions out there. And finally, because I have the platform, I'm going to say thank you to every single person on this consortium for making me a better, more well-educated person, a better practitioner, and a better human being in general.
Thank you, Lisa. I think Sam has his hand up.
I think Linda had some trouble unmuting with her phone. And I think Kevin's saying something in the chat, maybe similar. I'm looking forward to hearing that, but that someone said early on that all behavior is communication in this meeting. And Linda presenting around tech challenges, and having a tech challenge is certainly a behavior speaking volumes. And Linda was hospitalized with COVID last week and over the weekend. And so I think it also just speaks out the need for collaboration. And people talked about the intersecting crisis around caregiving and direct support professionals. And so I just wanted to share that on Linda's behalf. And hopefully, Linda, you're staying cool and know that, that your tech support challenge is a way to speak volumes toward the need that you're identifying. And you're amazing, Linda.
In the chat, Kevin had said speech to speech in regards to Lisa's remarks. And Kevin said Linda did a performative version of her speech on how tech barriers can fail. Linda just had to be different and artistic. And Patrick had said, yes, thank you, Sarah and Bree, and thank you to all of you.
So I will thank Linda on her behalf of her presentation, and thank you, Linda, for putting the time together. And again, we all feel bad that you're unable to present what you have probably took a very long time in producing. And we also hope that you feel much better and we wish you all we all wish you well. So that brings us to our next slide, which is our final slide is the big picture. And we have Jordyn who will give us a big picture piece on our solutions to barriers.
Hello, this is Jordyn again. Thank you to all the fellow workgroup members, plus Jill and Sarah, who have done a great job in listing some ways that we might be able to work through some of the barriers to peer support. However, when we break them down, there are a lot of barriers, and so we want to call that out, because for every barrier, there are various solutions. So with that, it's important to name that no one option is going to work for everyone. For example, one that has already been shared throughout today is the idea of virtual, in-person, and hybrid access. In various workgroups, we've discussed a lot about the need to have some in-person connection in order to form a deeper relationship and prevent some of the ongoing burnout that you heard about from the steering committee, but that in-person connection might also be a major barrier in itself, as you also heard. So any solution needs to have multiple solutions built within it, so AAC users can opt in and out, and choose what works for our individual needs, since our needs can ebb and flow. Today, the steering committee also raised the point of chat access as a barrier, and this goes back to a conversation that some of us have had since the beginning, which is the caregiving crisis, and the need for trained direct support in order to access not only in-person peer support, but also virtual spaces. At its core, funding is a barrier to this. In order to even access peer support, feel empowered, and grow in connection, and it's really the crux of this all, and there's not an easy solution, but the consortium has shown us how a strong community and workflow can help. Now, more than ever, this is a concern, and we will need to be even more creative in coming up with ways to access peer support. Now we'll move into the discussion, so I'll pass it to Jill for moderation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jordyn. Thank you, everybody.